In May 1989, a man called Robert Lazar would come forward and make astonishing claims about aliens and UFOs. Lazar claimed that not only did the US government possess crashed extraterrestrial technology, not only had alien interactions with us gone back thousands of years, but that we were actually reverse engineering alien spacecraft to serve our own purposes, albeit without much success. But who is Bob Lazar? Is he a whistleblower? Is he a liar? Or is he something in between? Robert Lazar was born on January 20th, 1959, in Florida, and would later move to New York, where his family were neighbours with rocket designer Eugene Gluharev. This proximity to scientific genius would be fostered through his interactions with him. At one stage, his mother, terrified by a huge bang outside, ran downstairs to find Lazar, as you casually do, fitting a rocket engine onto his bike. During this time, Bob studied at Pierce College, then, according to himself and some of those around him, studied physics and electronics at Pacifica via correspondence. He also, however, took some time to focus on his personal life, and in 1980 he married Carol Strong. Shortly thereafter, the pair moved to Los Alamos, where Bob initially focused on his photo processing business. Soon, however, due to his scientific experience, Bob secured work with Kirk Mayer. Kirk Mayer is essentially an employment agency for the government, supplying contractors and small-timers to work at sites like Los Alamos National Lab, a key part of the military-industrial complex, and there Bob got to work. Essentially a tech guy who fixed computers and machines, pointed out errors and problems, and, according to friends who knew him there, was incredibly clever and good at his job. While living in Los Alamos, Bob also continued with his electronic and rocket hobbies on the side, actually installing a jet engine in a car at one stage. A Los Alamos newspaper actually covered the event, describing Bob as a physicist, which confused colleagues at Los Alamos, because he wasn't one, according to them. However, Bob soldiered on in spite of various setbacks. He bought a house in Vegas, continued his work, and continued hustling, in spite of the fact that at one stage he was forced to file for bankruptcy and was $300,000 in debt to his friends, family members, and parents. In fact, he was such a good hustler that he actually bought a brothel, and it became so wildly successful at some points that he didn't even need to work, and his life seemed to be looking up still, even in spite of his wife Carol living in Vegas, while Lazar spent most of his time in Los Alamos, and signs of his marriage breaking down. It continued to look up in spite of his marriage actually breaking down, and him marrying his second wife Tracy, and getting away with it despite being legally married to Carol, who would soon be found dead in a carbon monoxide-filled car, having apparently committed suicide. Bob's life would continue going well, however. In December 1988, he claimed he got a job at the ultra-secret S4 base at Groom Lake, concealed within Papoose mountain range, a secret subsidiary of Area 51, and claimed it was testing all kinds of secret futuristic craft, which he himself was working on. In March, to prove his claims, he discreetly took his friends, Gene Hoff and John Lear, to the base to see one of the test flights on the secretive craft that were being conducted every Wednesday. They reported seeing a light flying around for several minutes. On the second trip, they filmed another. On the third, they were discovered and detained by the Camo Dudes, and in April 1989, Lazar's security clearance was suddenly revoked. He was never officially fired, never dismissed. He merely claims his clearance was suddenly and unaccountably revoked. He claims the government told him it was because his wife was caught having an affair with her flight instructor, which could result in, quote, emotional instability, and this was a routine thing whenever someone went through turmoil, to prevent secrets being leaked, or the person turning on the government due to it. In April, he gave an interview to the media under silhouette, under the name of Dennis, which he claimed was the name of his Area 51 supervisor. He claims he was then targeted by the government, and his car shot at, so he came out using his real name in May of 1989, and the rest is history. And boy, was it a rich history. Bob claimed that at first, when he went to work for S4, he was told he would be working on experimental aircraft, but that all 9 of these saucer-shaped craft were small, too small for adult humans, and had seats that were more befitting of children. Also, for, quote, experimental craft, it was strange that he and other scientists were asked to discern the propulsion systems and help make breakthroughs. Surely, if they were human-made, those would be known. And then, to compound his amazement, he was given a briefing document, claiming these craft were originally owned by the Zeta Reticulians, what we call Greys, originally from one of the planets around the twin star systems of Zeta Reticuli. They'd been interacting with humans for over 10,000 years, their spaceships crashed here now and then, and at one stage, they'd been working with the US government, until, in 1980, they'd killed soldiers and scientists at various bases, including Area 51, and left, but promised to return. It was this knowledge, he claimed, that got him attempted to be assassinated. Lazar's life trajectory, since this point, has been mixed. Bob has given 1 or 2 interviews and been in a podcast or 2, but by and large has kept his life low-key, not wanting vast amounts of publicity. He owns his own science shop, mixes with his family, does his own thing, at one point got raided by all the alphabet agencies, and continues to be fiercely debated by critics and fans alike. But how credible are Bob Lazar's claims really? First, we'll go over the things in support of him, then those in opposition. In support, Bob was featured in a magazine as a scientist, years before he put his claims out there in the public eye. He claims he studied physics and electronics at Pacifica in 1978, a master's in physics from MIT in 1982, and a master's from Caltech in 1985, and friends and family do maintain that he did. Furthermore, he clearly, from his hobbies and experience, can be considered a scientist indeed, even for people who say he wasn't one in name, and to compound all this, his name was indeed included in the Groom Lake telephone directory, Groom Lake being one of the US government's most secretive, secure sites, linked to S4, which the government actually admitted existed in 2013. Furthermore, he's shown a W-2 salary statement seeming to have been issued by the Department of Naval Intelligence, which is claimed, until recently, ran Area 51. In addition, he took his friends out to Area 51 to show them flying craft. How, his supporters claim, would he know they'd be flying there if he was lying? In addition, in 2018, he was raided by the FBI, CIA, Homeland Security and numerous other agencies, after claiming he had kept a sample of element 115 since the 1980s. These agencies, however, claim it was linked to a murder case, claiming that his scientific shop had sold an element that was used in such a case. This talk of element 1115, or 115 as I'm going to call it, is key to Lazar's story. He claimed the craft can bend space around themselves, enabling themselves to travel many times the speed of light via element 115, which is transmuted in the reactor into the super heavy element 116. And element 115 was discovered to exist in 2013, whereas he'd been talking about it since 1989. Now, let's get to the evidence he could be a fabricator, or at least a partial one. Lazar claims he has multiple qualifications to back up his, claims. He claims he studied physics and electronics at Pacifica in 1978, got a master's in physics from MIT in 1982, and a master's from Caltech in 1985. But nobody at the time could identify Pacifica University as a physical body. Lazar then claimed, suddenly, oh, that's because it was a correspondence school. Pacifica University was found, subsequently, but when they did trace it, it had been shuttered after being accused of selling degrees. Furthermore, with regard to MIT, researcher Glenn Campbell, researched all printed material, since Lazar claimed the government had wiped all traces of existence and cleared him out. The government could clearly erase all records from an archive, but certainly couldn't track down and remove every piece of printed material. And Campbell found no trace of him in any of that printed material, and found no trace of him in the student directory. Furthermore, with regard to Bob's electronics degrees from Caltech, an official there said they never offered those degrees, and even if Bob had studied some other course there, which he described as an electronics degree, they found no trace of him in their printed material or archives. Fair enough, Lazar's supporters argue. Some of them, the ones who don't blindly accept everything he says is truth, are, to their credit, open-minded enough to say, well, maybe he inflated his credentials to look more credible, but he is a real scientist in all but name. There are some, however, who are not convinced. The late Stanton Friedman thought Bob failed to answer many deep, in-depth scientific questions put to him, and many have also found his claim that the craft could bend space and time around themselves to be ludicrous, and have also thus called his scientific claims into question. Furthermore, they also call into question his actual work experience. It's clear that he did work for the government, but many detractors point out that the only evidence that existed that he did is that he worked as a contractor on a contracting job, and contractors don't necessarily need scientific degrees. And indeed, many people who don't have them or couldn't get them choose that route. They also point out that the friends who knew him at Los Alamos claim he was never a physicist, the W-2 salary statement he claims to have received proving he worked at Area 51, then operated under the Department of Naval Intelligence, must be false, since the DNI hadn't been around since World War II, and they also point out his history of shadiness, and criminal history, for that matter. He was convicted of illegally financing a brothel, sentenced to 150 hours of community service. He and Tracy also divorced, then remarried in 1987, but for some weird reason, she used the name Jackie Evans during the marriage. What was this for? To evade some kind of scrutiny, help him cover something up? We don't know. It's also alleged he once described Bob as a Clark Rockefeller, making reference to the infamous conman who scammed his way across America, despite having not one piece or proof of documentation, all the while making his fabulous claims. Also, many people claim that element 115 being proven to exist proves Lazar's claims. However, is it not possible that element 115 was synthesized years later and was completely unrelated to Area 51? Note that it was discovered in Russia, not in America, and is not known to have been linked to any kind of flying saucer. Taking all this evidence into account, here's what I think happened. I think Bob Lazar did work in government service. I think he is a de facto scientist. I think he does have a lot of knowledge. However, I think he worked as a contractor, not a scientist. I think his security clearance exposed him to all kinds of fabulous things, maybe even some crashed alien tech, and maybe he was actually asked unofficially, because he was such a genius, to work on some of it. But it's possible that he exaggerated some of it or made some of it up, in order to make his story seem more fascinating, much like Phil Schneider did. Maybe he was so good at his job, as colleagues say he was, hence him ending up in the Groom Lake phone book, that he was brought in to work on either crashed alien craft or experimental human craft, began to talk about it too carelessly, show it off to people, his life of shadiness came back to haunt him, the government found out, and his security clearance was revoked. Note that he was actually detained while showing off these alleged craft. From my own personal perspective as well, and I know you guys are going to hate this, I do not believe time can be bent around a craft by anyone, as he claims, since I believe only God can adjust time and reality, not people. I know people will hate me for saying that, but I'm not going to compromise my views for clicks, or popularity, or the zeitgeist. Overall, I believe some of Bob's claims are true, others are false. But what do you guys think about Bob Lazar and his fabulous claims? Please post your comments below, like and subscribe, hit the bell notification button so you don't miss anything, and consider supporting my channel on Patreon. The link is in the description below. As always, thank you for tuning in to Saucercast.